Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of This My Kitchen Table Talks, in which I invite writers and spiritual practitioners in from the cold. And it is very cold up here in Southern Ontario already while we're recording. And I don't know what it is like down in South Carolina, Taren. How is it?
Oh, it's a chilly 64.
So not quite as cold, but cold for what you're used to. So come on in out of the cold. I've got the cup of tea and or coffee, depending, ready for us. And for everybody joining us, this is Taren S. And for those who don't know who Taren is, many of you may probably already know if you're involved with hoodoo or traditional witchcraft. But for those who don't know, there we go. Taren S stood in her first magical circle at 17 years old in the backwoods of North Carolina. She was initiated High Priestess within American Witchcraft in 1995 and has stood as High Priestess at various festivals and events throughout the East Coast. For over a decade, she worked as a spiritual counselor and professional tarot card reader. Furthering her magical and spiritual path, she was initiated as a Mama Bridget within American Voodoo. She resides in Charleston, South Carolina, with her husband, 3 dogs, and a black cat with an attitude. She is the author of Hoodoo in the Psalms and her newest book, Conjuring Dirt, both through Moon Books. You can find out more at houseofwitchcraft.com. And for those who are watching the YouTube video, you can, of course, find her website just below her name, just right there. And those who are listening, it'll be in the show notes. So welcome to this show, Taren. Welcome.
Hello. Thank you
Hello.
so much for having me.
I feel like I know you already because we were just chatting for such a long time before the show. So that was
I
good.
know.
Yeah. So,
That's okay.
Sorry, go on.
Southerners, we like
I
to
know.
talk.
Well, as I was saying to you, quite a few of my guests recently on the show have been Southerners, and I feel like I just spend half the day talking to them, and it's delightful, and I love it. So I think I need more Southerners on now.
I love that. Come on. Come
Come
on down
on,
south
come
below the
on.
Mason-Dixie line. Come on.
So that being said, though, you've actually been kind of all over the place, really. You spent 7 years recently in San Diego, California. So maybe we can start with that because your work in hoodoo and particularly with Conjuring Dirt is all about roots, all about connection, all about that relationship to specific places. So I'm curious. Let's start out with that. What was it like for you to move across the country for 7 years?
It was one of the scariest things I ever did. And having the courage and the belief that the universe was putting me where I needed to be. You know, it was an opportunity. And so I was let's do it. And going to California, San Diego, I joke with folks, I feel like I went to a foreign country and I should have got my passport stamped. I learned about all sorts of interesting things like avocado toast.
It's
And,
delicious.
you know,
It's delicious.
I like it. Um, and the roots, the history of California, the spirit of the land there.
Mm.
But more importantly, I think leaving here gave me a chance to really appreciate on a much different level where I'm from. You know, I often tell folks I couldn't have wrote Conjuring Dirt if I'd been sitting here. I had to leave to look back. I had to look at my world, realize what I missed, what was important, what I've been taught. And that's what Conjuring Dirt came about. It ended up almost as a love letter to myself on these are my roots. This is my dirt. And the opportunity to share it with other people so that they too could find their roots, their spirit of place and understanding. It's in your own backyard.
It's in your own backyard. Yes.
You don't have to
Yeah.
go, you don't have to go to California and find out about avocado toast.
Yeah.
You know, and and it really just brought such a deeper appreciation from where I'm from. And very much a pride in the fact I'm a proud Southern witch. And California taught me so much about where I'm from.
I'm not surprised at all, because honestly, it's my life story right there. I came from the UK, but I came when I was very, very young, and I feel like I've known more about the UK in absentia. And now that I'm preparing to move back over there, I'm really noticing the differences of that experience. I don't think I would connect with that place so strongly if I hadn't been away from it for such a long time.
Yes.
Yeah.
The longer I was away, the more it was time to come home.
Right. Right.
Where I had reached the point of spirits calling, it's time to come back to my dirt. It's time to haunt my graveyards. I mean, because I go to places that I've been going to for 30, 40 years. So there's a history there.
Yes.
It's a familiarity to it. And I talk a little bit about that in Conjuring Dirt, where I talk about Bonaventure Cemetery in Savannah. And the first time I was in that cemetery, I was 18 years old.
Right, right.
And I turned 60 in 2 months.
So just a few years older. So just a few years older.
A couple. But I've been going there and seeing it and watching the changes of it. Yes. And it's a welcoming home experience when I walk through that area. And learning the deeper history of it as well. That's what I always encourage folks. Learn the history of where you stand.
I really resonate with that. One thing that I read about in my own book, again, is that sense of place. And I feel like for a lot of North Americans or people in settled lands everywhere, there can be a weird relationship with the land that they're on. On the one hand, knowing that their ancestry may only go back in that place for 100, 200, 300 years, but that they're from there, right? It can be a weird sort of dynamic there. What I love about sorry, go on.
I was to say, because I went to Ireland. I was telling you, I mean, I'm Irish, predominantly Irish. And so I went back to ancestral lands. And I was very happy that I got to go. But I also standing there realized that wasn't my land.
Right.
That was my ancestors' land. And that my ancestors carried the stories of that land. Whereas for me, I carried the stories here. My folks came over like in the 1700s. We're part of the Virginia colonists. So we've been here a while. We've been on the wrong side of all of the decisions. Just full disclosure. Okay. I mean, I'm like, yes. And learning to make peace with that as well as a Southerner. Especially those of us of European descent, if we've been in the country long enough, we were tangled up in that Civil War. We were tangled up in all of it, and I have relatives that I go visit and they have the CSA emblem on their tomb, Confederate States of America. And learning that history more these are my stories. My ancestors of Ireland had great stories, and I'm so blessed for them. And that I got to walk on that land. But going there made me realize that ain't mine. They put me over here for a reason. And I think a lot of folks here in America, especially, or even in any of our, I think we have in Australia as well, where we deal with the colonization, Europeans coming over, standing on indigenous land and trying to figure out where they are in that. Absolutely. And it is difficult. That's where some folks, go, I'm going to go be an Irish witch, because it's easier to do that than it is to make peace with what's going on here.
And that really comes through. Sorry. Well, and that really comes through in your book, like Conjuring Dirt, and like just going through it all. Every exercise, every piece of wisdom in there is about relating now, not relating to the past, not really going back to the past, not getting stuck in the past, but relating now and being open to that relationship now. So what was it like for you then, your very first time coming back to some of these spaces after being away for such a long time?
I was like dancing around happy.
Right.
How was well while I was in California, I was still coming back here. I have family here,
Yeah.
so I never really left. But I just got tired of flying back and forth across country. As we pointed out, it's where I live, London is closer than San
Yeah.
Diego. And so just flying across country, I was at the point where I'm like, I gotta stop this. It reaffirmed, I spent 7 years in California learning California, learning that spirit of place, that land. The first thing I did was find out how the little town I lived in, who the founders were. Why did you find this town? And its history, and then finding out who the indigenous folks were. What was that relationship like? How can I honor both of these? Because I'm a visitor to this land, and getting to experience that in California was something that I had never done here. I've grown up here. I was raised here. I don't know any different. And I talk about you need to develop a relationship with spirit of place. And I think the universe has a sense of humor and put me in California and was like, you've been talking it, now you need to walk it. How do you
Right?
develop a spirit of place when you're not from that place? You ain't got no folk buried there. Ain't nothing in the dirt to hold you. Where do you learn to grab the dirt? And I found I learned it in history. I learned it in graveyards. I learned it in little museums. I was very lucky to have some friends that were part of the are part of the Polynation, which is one of the indigenous bands of people. They don't call themselves a tribe. They call themselves a band. That's why I'm like, what? We can't say that. I've been corrected too many times on this one. But listening to their stories and really hearing what the land had, the stories of the land connected me to it. So that when I did stand under a full moon, I felt like I was getting the dirt of California, of San Diego County, and coming back home, it just sort of reaffirmed that for me. It doesn't, you can go anywhere in the world and develop a relationship with the spirit of place, the spirit of the land, and it's gonna take time. I was there for 7 years. I would say the first 3 years, I was just sort of wandering around.
Right.
Trying to figure it out, And
it does, it takes time. Yeah.
Watching the seasons and being a part of those seasons is so important. I think that's one of the things a lot of folks think, oh, I'm just going to do this real quick and then it's all done. Right. And developing a relationship is exactly that, developing a relationship. And it takes years to develop it. I mean, after 7 years in San Diego, I cried a little when I left. I enjoyed it. But at the same time, I wanted to come home. For me, it was a very deep sense of this is where I belong. And I've had so much opportunity to travel. I've been to a lot of places, and home always calls.
Home always calls. And it's such a visceral feeling too, isn't it?
Yes. It's just this deep. When I got here and everything, it was just that relief, I guess. I don't even know how you say it. You're just like, okay, this makes sense.
It's funny, isn't it? Because I've been experiencing this sort of feeling for a very, very, very long time, ever since I moved from the UK. And it's funny how, I grew up in a small town for 25 years. Pretty much that was my hometown over here. And when my parents finally left 2 years ago and left that place, the sense I always got from that place was, oh, it's you again. Oh, it's you again, right? It's weird. Like just driving around Ontario up here, where I've had the chance to live some places for 2 years, some places for 6 years, some places for 3 years. It's been a very strange feeling because certain areas feel more like home because of how much I invested into that place, relationship, right? You know? Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
And that's what I tell folks. It's going to take time
It's gonna take time. Yeah,
and
yeah.
enjoy it.
So here's a question for you then, Tarrant. Because 7 years, so biologically speaking, they say, I don't know if it's true or not, but biologically they say it takes 7 years for your body to be fully replaced, right? So the body that left and then came back now is composed of a lot of the stuff from California. What relationship do you have with California now, being so far away from it? If at all.
California, I was going to say, it will always hold a place in my heart.
Mm-hmm.
I held the dirt. I honored the dirt.
Yeah.
And it's I enjoyed my time. I met amazing people. I got to do amazing things. And so sometimes now I guess I look back and I wonder, was it a dream?
So funny, isn't it?
Yeah,
Wow. Yeah.
that the universe gave me that experience. I just feel so privileged. Because a lot of times I know for me, when I wrote Hoodoo in the Psalms, I had not really, almost been outside my world. And so I wrote as more of an insider. I didn't have the correct phraseology, so I would use hoodoo and Southern conjure interchangeably without understanding some of the synchronous differences, and also without really get full comprehension. Because around here we just all are doing a little something, and never thought anything much of it. And leaving here allowed me to look back on my world with a more analytical, and then also having to explain my world more to outsiders.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
talking with folks about it, I mean, because prior to Hoodoo in the Psalms, I just worked at a little botanica in a little southern town for a Haitian Voodoo Priest, and everybody in town knew that. And no, but we didn't really talk about it.
Yeah.
And then you go outside your world and people are like, what are you doing? And you're like, I don't know, just
I'm just doing it. Yeah.
I don't know what we're doing, but we're doing it. And finding the words to explain, because when you get in, hoodoo is such a broad umbrella word to use. It's like saying I'm pagan.
Right.
And then just ending the sentence, like, sure, that clears everything up.
Yeah,
right?
exactly right.
It is such a large umbrella, and people starting to understand that, and also understanding that the magical offshoots that came about because of hoodoo, and that my side of the mountain is different than your side of the mountain. I talk, that I think the biggest thing folk magic that we really deal with is the bioregionalism of our practices, being that it's very to each region. From one side of the mountain to the other, it's different. It's not wrong or right.
No,
it's just
continuum.
Different.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like that's changing though. We're moving away from this kind of generalized to more of an understanding. Or maybe that's just an echo chamber I happen to be in because I talk to people like you and some of the other colleagues of ours. But I feel like it's changing. People are more interested in investing, but the danger with that is seeing those individual places as being isolates. And I think that's one of the dangers, right?
Yes. And I refer to it as a funky gumbo.
I do love gumbo.
It is a funky gumbo. And depending on where you are, it determines what ingredients you're putting in your gumbo. It depends on how you relate to it, but understanding that gumbo takes all of us.
Yeah.
And all of those flavors come together to create something amazing. And
Yes.
at times it's hard to explain, because yes, we are so influenced by the Middle Passage. We are influenced by Native American. We're influenced by European. And the recipe changes according to where you stand.
Literally, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah.
The New Orleans gumbo is not the gumbo at Charleston.
There's similarities, right? But sometimes
Yeah.
different flair, and absolutely, absolutely. So with that, then coming back to you writing a book, then on working with dirt in conjure, right? I'm curious, then, what was it like for you to take your experience with your particular gumbos and then write a cookbook for other people to use in general? What was the main focus for you?
Bonadventure Cemetery was where the book was born.
Mm.
Bonadventure Cemetery is in Savannah, Georgia. And it was also featured in the movie Garden, what is it? Good and
Garden of the Good and
Evil,
Evil. Yeah.
in the Garden of Midnight and everything. And so when I was talking, I had taken a couple of friends to Bonadventure and was giving a little tour. I was doing my witchy tour guide thing with my friends. And I turned around and I realized my tour group was growing.
As it does.
Right? I got more folks on the tour group, and I'm telling the story of little Gracie. I tell the story in the book, where this is where I was standing in front of little Gracie, and I'm telling the story, and I realized the tour group has gotten larger, and now they're starting to ask me some questions, and I'm answering them, and I see these people are just leaning into this information. And I realized, I was like, oh my, this is a good story I'm carrying. And so I started writing it down, and it started in the graveyard. And in the process of the graveyard, I ended up in the crossroads with dirt, and I also ended up in footprints with dirt.
Yes.
And how we use it. And that was another thing where I was talking with somebody about, I got to go up to the bank and get me some dirt.
Nice.
And my friend is like, what in the world are you talking about? I was in California. I'm like, I got to go get me some bank dirt because I'm working on prosperity. So of course you want you a little bit of bank dirt, and I started again explaining what I'm doing, and everybody started leaning in, and the realization that it's all around us and y'all ain't thinking about it, And so with that, and then coming back here to South Carolina, I could come back and talk with other practitioners and be like, what's your favorite dirt? What do you do in the crossroads? What do you think about being in the cemetery? And so I used a lot of practitioners I know and would ask them. And it took me 3 years to do conjuring dirt from start to finish.
I believe it. I really believe it.
Quick writer.
Well, but this is the thing, right? This what really comes through in the book, because you break it down, and I really appreciated that. You break it down so particularly that anybody can open this up and be like, I want to work with, a three-way directional crossroads instead of a four-way directional crossroads. I can go to this, right? But you can tell even within those sections that you've sat and actually really built a relationship with that one type versus another type. I really appreciated that. So I believe 3 years. I feel like that's. I feel like that was probably very quick for you for the amount of stuff you put into it.
It was a lot of times waiting for the stories to come, or waiting for somebody to ask me a question, or for an experience to happen, where I'm standing there in the middle of it. I'm like, oh, I got to go write this down. I talk about Old Sheldon Church, that is right down the road. I was actually there last week. But Old Sheldon's now got a fence around it because in the late 90s, some of the local practitioners were cursing on one of the politicians.
I see.
So the solution for the politician was to get funding to put a fence around the church.
Right. Which
And
is
again,
interesting.
I was telling this story to some people and they were just like, is this real? And I'm like, oh yeah, this is all documented. This is real truth right here. You're talking, and realizing that that was this local story, but that it carried a global knowledge to it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it slowly developed. I didn't really have an outline or anything like that. It just ended up falling into those three sections. And with the crossroads, because we have certain crossroads here, like you're saying, there's a well-known three-way crossroads, in which if you're doing workings of love and you want a little bit, you want to get pregnant, fertility, things like that, you go up to the three-way crossroads. As opposed to if you're doing a road opening work, you go to a four-way crossroads.
Which would make sense, right? Absolutely. Yeah.
It does make sense when you think about it, but then the realization was, I was like, doesn't everybody know this?
Well, and that's the thing, isn't it? Like, people can know things without knowing them, right? People, like you were saying, it took time for you to go away to come back to even realize some of the subconscious things that you've been doing anyways, because it's like we when you name something, you suddenly become very aware of it, right?
Oh, yes. That is the perfect example right there. And and so much of folk magic, because I consider myself a modern folk witch. It's the best I've come up with so far in 40 years. When people are like, what are you? And I'm like, I have no idea.
Yeah.
I'm a modern folk witch. But that our magic is influenced by the past. It's influenced by the lore, the myth, the spirits of place, but at the same time, we're putting it in a modern world.
Yes.
And how we can use that magic so that it benefits us, our communities. Folk magic, the cunning folk in Britain, the underlying purpose was being of service to your community.
Absolutely.
What have you given to the community before you choose to take from it? And being aware of that. If you want to get involved in, any of our folk magic practices, first, what have you done? What are you contributing? It's like working with the graveyard, or even working with any form of divinity where you're like, I don't have time to pray for you until I need
you. Right. Yes. The whole buffet.
What do you mean you ain't answering me?
Yeah.
And then like, I'm like, well, you never showed up and said nice words. You never showed up, and gave offerings except when you need something. And that's not what it's about.
Yeah.
It's a mutual relationship that you develop with spirit realm folk. It's a mutual relationship you develop with spirit of place. And when you have that relationship, the trees tell you things, the ground feels different, the breeze moves a slightly different way. You feel you're a part of it. And at times I get a little tongue-tied because I'm like, I don't know how to explain to you that it's inside you. That chill that goes down your spine when you walk through a certain crossroad versus that feeling of euphoria of when you go through another crossroad.
Absolutely.
And learning to get your intuitive, magical third eye, whatever phraseology folks use, but learning to really lean into that, embrace it and use it. I think the biggest thing that stops a lot of folks is they get too up in their head.
I agree completely. You start to overthink things, it becomes too theoretical, in which case you're not really connecting, right?
And when you're dealing with dirt, it's all a feeling.
Yeah. It
It's
is. No, it totally is. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's I'm noticing well, the trend has been going on for a while now, but that whole concept of, I am the witch of so and so, or I am the witch of such and such a place. And oftentimes it's big cities. Oftentimes there's a real sense of me in that. Don't come for me, don't send me letters, right? But it's one I have noticed that. I've also seen, though, a lot more practitioners take up that idea, that mantle of I am the witch of so and so. And so, this is my offering to this place. So I am the witch of so and so, and I'm relating to these specific places within that place. It's that relationship. So I can't really say that it's one way or the other, but I have noticed it's an interesting thing. People are more interested in grounding themselves, literally grounding themselves, right?
Well, I think we're learning based on the knowledge we have. When we look at
Yeah.
talking about modern magical practitioners, where our explosion, the spiritualist movement of the 1920s, going into the 1950s, where we really, for the first time, had witchcraft magical books that were being presented to us.
Mm.
And those folks were using what they had, and we have to be gentle with them. They didn't have access to what we have. So much had been lost that needed to be found. And we're at a point now, I think, where we are finding a lot of that. We're going back so we can go forward and finding these pieces of folk magic. A lot of times we have to be within folk practitioners. It's about looking at archaeology, anthropology, and also understanding that some of the archaeologists were already biased. And,
Very much so.
you see the reference when we get into early archaeology in the late 1800s, where they labeled everything a goddess cult.
Yes. Yes.
They were all
Yeah.
part of cults, the myth or a cult, like it was somehow bad. And I'm like, dude, I was so vibed, except for the blood part. But these days, I'm really there on. But we didn't have that. They didn't have that knowledge. We do now. And we do have more ability to connect with each other, whereas we would have been isolated. The folk practitioner in the village, they may have talked to one or two other practitioners their entire lifetime.
Yeah. So it was really a worldview that we were applying as opposed to, swapping notes left, right, and center. Absolutely. Yeah.
And now I think we are more swapping notes, and we're also learning to appreciate each other's magic.
Yes.
And it sometimes is confusing, especially for a newcomer coming into the community, because we did the neo-paganism and the traditional witchcraft, and then we deal into our folk practices, and then we get into our ATR practices.
Yes.
And it's no wonder I get confused some days.
Right. Yes. Yeah, it's
Who's
true.
who, but understanding all of these are valid magical practices, traditions to somebody.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And
I
giving
should
space.
well, and that's the thing. I feel like a lot of people get confused by all of those terms, those names, all of those things. And I don't know if you were saying this on recording or before the recording, but you were talking about that confusing or using interchangeably hoodoo and southern conjure, and that understanding now that there are differences between those, and appreciating those differences.
Yeah, we just didn't think about it. We were sitting in our own little village, in our own little town, using the words that we had been taught.
Had available, absolutely. Yeah.
And not looking at it, like you said, that world view, having to describe to an outsider what is going on. And I think we're all a work in progress. I think as we learn better, we do better.
Oh, I totally agree. I'm a complete mess. I'm just saying, like, I'll always be a complete mess, right? I'm kind of curious now. So you started in 1995, and really came into the community in 1995-ish, or earlier than that, was it?
earlier.
A little bit earlier.
We're not going to talk about, actually, my first circle was in 1983.
Okay. Really, like the 1980s was such an explosion for like the literature. I mean, Scott Cunningham and all like that whole generation was
I
starting to
wasn't
put stuff out.
exposed to that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm from the folk side where Anna Riva,
Okay.
Papa Jim's Herbal Handbook,
Mm-hmm.
The Power of the Psalms.
Right.
All right,
The almanacs, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely the almanacs. What is it? Curses and Hexes of Marie Laveau by Anna Riva, I think.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So that we were, it's referred to as mail order hoodoo, because we have hoodoo before mail order, and then we have hoodoo after mail order. And that's where we were introduced to a lot of the Solomonic magics. That's why within hoodoo you see the use of solemn seals, and the writing down of abracadabra at the Sator Square, things like that, where there's these very high ceremonial magic elements that will surprise folks. And the other thing that we find within our hoodoo communities at times is the sprinkling of Chinese mysticism,
That's
the use
right.
of red envelopes, the use of coins, and things like that. And that is from this time period when, because it was, Chinese folks that pretty much built our railroads across America that we never talk about. But they lived in the Black communities, and there was a transfer of information going on there. And then it continues. We're still, to this day, transferring knowledge to each other.
Oh, totally.
Just because it was older doesn't make it authentic.
Well, this is the thing, right? The Spiritismo has certainly told me that, like the ability to take up that worldview again and create with what you've got, right? One of my favorite aspects of that kind of transmission, especially between the Chinese community and the African community at that time, was Florida water. I love the fact that the Chinese, like the big Chinese brand of Florida water, is used in the same way in Chinese spiritualism, especially in like Vietnam and those places. I love that so much, right?
Yes, and that's something a lot of people don't know.
Yeah.
And if you're using Florida water, you should have some understanding of its history,
Absolutely.
who used it, why they used it, what it was used for, and how that applies to your life, your situation, and how you can use it. And that's there are so many blended examples, and we don't, I guess, stop to remember where it came from sometimes.
I feel like that's where the hegemony of the neo-pagan community being so like kind of Western English focused comes in, because in many ways, like when neo-paganism started to be really written about in the 1970s and 80s, there was this perception that, oh, English folk magic, that's where it's all at. Boom, right on top of like conjure and Southern Hoodoo and all of like the Appalachian traditions, all of this, right? And so then anything that sort of remotely looks like anything that's happening over here, even if it's been appropriated, is this sense of, oh, they took it from us. Well, no, you took it from them first, right?
I think what I remember in the 80s and the 90s was within community for me, within the folk community, was we were dismissed.
Right.
We're not doing it right. We're not doing it real. And that somehow the neo-pagans had it better. Their 7 steps of ritual was real, and you have to start at the east or else you're not doing it right, and all these other things. And you're just doing folk magic.
Right. How times have changed.
And like, the Appalachian folks and the Alabama swamp witches and all those other people, it was like, that's not real magic. The real magic is in this book from this dude from Britain.
Right.
That's where it's real at. And so I remember that for us, it was more further insulation, where we knew we weren't really welcome in a lot of those spaces. I mean, if I show up with a cow tongue at a neo-pagan ritual, I
You're like,
ain't welcome.
ooh.
But if I show up with a cow tongue for one of the feast days here, people think I brought something special.
Right. Yeah.
You know, so, but again, people didn't know what they didn't know. They didn't, we as our community wasn't out writing books. Our community wasn't out trying to get people to join us. So many aspects of the hoodoo and the Southern conjuring side are considered closed practices. We are more than willing to sit and chat with you, but on that one side, we're like, you ain't from here.
Yeah.
You ain't got no folks buried in this holler, so I ain't telling you our magic. You get up into the Appalachians, and they're very much like that. But now we're starting to have people step out and write about it. And we have more representation. And I think as we have more people writing about it, that other folks are learning that, when you say Appalachia, it doesn't just mean this one little area of West Virginia.
Right.
And that, the Appalachians themselves actually start down in Georgia and go all the way up to Canada.
All the way up. Absolutely. Yeah.
And through every ridge is a different magic. And we can take it all the way up. And not putting the broad stroke of, the Appalachian granny. She's only in one small area.
Right. It goes back to what we were talking about with words, though, that idea that like suddenly there's a word that can describe somewhat what I think I'm practicing. So I'm going to latch onto that without realizing that there are major differences in that, right? So
we really do. Define the word because I may be using it differently than you. I talk, that your bundle bag is my mojo bag, is your something.
Exactly.
Where yes, we're calling it something different. Yeah, we are slightly different, but we are still doing the essence of the same.
And I think coming back to your book, to bring that back in, I think that's really the invitation that you leave off with is, these are all the ways you can think about working with these different types of dirt. Go and do it. Like, go and build that relationship. Go and get messy, right?
Go get dirty.
Go and get dirty, right? Yeah.
Go get dirty. One of the stories I started with was the bank dirt, and me telling some folks in California you needed bank dirt, and then going through all the other dirts that I knew. And then I went on to do research with the Middleton journals, and which is when people are like, well, where's all of this at? And I'm like, we have some great documentation. We just don't want to talk about it. With the hoodoo and conjuration, and he says other words we can't say out loud anymore, and so we refer to it as the Middleton journals. And that was Henry Hyatt Middleton in the 1920s, went around interviewing folk practitioners throughout the East Coast. It was part of a writer's project. Where they got on this kick of, we're gonna record these stories before these people die.
Those are the huge big volumes. There's like 7 or 8 of them, right? Huge big volumes, right?
Yes, there's 7 of them about this thick. And then he also has the what is it? Cook County, Illinois folk.
That's right. Yes, that's right. Yeah, I actually so that's on the archive. I actually have a copy of that somewhere.
Yes, and that one again were magic travels type thing. And when I started looking into a lot of the entries, realizing so much of the entries are based on dirt.
Yes. So I have a question then. Maybe you can give a very good opinion on this, because I know one of the major criticisms of that is that he was an outsider coming in. How trustworthy do you feel that documentation is? I know it's a big question.
He was an Anglican priest, minister from Illinois. And so he wasn't caught up in a lot of what was going on the coast, the north and the south. So first understand that about him. I think that there was a definite power dynamic at points. You're talking about an old white guy sitting down and talking to, at times, ex-slaves, or folks that their parents had been enslaved. There was still the memory within that generation. And so did they embellish a little bit because they felt important? The white guy's talking to me. Or were they resentful and was like, you don't have the right to know this, so I'm just going to tell you bullshit? Or were they part of the, we need to tell the story so it doesn't get lost, so let me tell you exactly what I know? And I think all of that's happening in the Middleton journals. There are definitely some entries that are complete bullshit. I mean, just reading through it, you're like, yeah, they're telling story right there. That ain't
it's true.
That ain't real. All right, ain't nobody.
Well, and it's funny because, like, looking at so I've been heavily looking at folklore journals from where I'm from in North Wales and where my mum and dad are from, and I get the humor of the North, right? Like Craig Spencer, we were mentioned, you sat down with Craig a few weeks ago. Like, he's actually from 20 minutes from where my dad is from. We have the same sense of humor, right? So I'm reading through these journals, and especially the ones that are from London and the upper class, folklorists, right? And you can just tell in some cases the people they're talking to are taking the complete piss out of them. And it's like, you wouldn't know that if you weren't from this place, right?
Right, you have to have a working knowledge, some understanding to read the Middleton journals. You can, if you read them as an outsider, you'll never decipher them. At the Botanica, we were dealing. This is a terrible story. I'm just going to disclose this at a time. We do not do this, but this is a good story. Where if you got somebody coming in that is just bothering you and you need to get rid of them, you're going to give them some sort of bullshit working.
It works, right?
I'm just speaking truth right now. I ain't saying it's right. I'm just saying what I've done. A friend of mine did this. I did it. And you always start out, Papa will say, start with 4 black chickens. So if anything starts with 4 black chickens, we know immediately it's bullshit. But for somebody from the outside, they're like, oh my God, they really need 4 black chickens. Because I've had, how do you become magical? And I'm like, well, you got to get your 4 black chickens.
And go cow tipping afterwards, right?
And what you're going to do is you need to put them in, draw you a circle, and you got to put the 4 black chickens in the circle, and then you got to pray. And if any of them leave the circle, you got to put them back in and start over until all of them stay while you're praying.
That's horrible. That's terrible.
It is terrible. But again, there is purposeful misinformation. I think it's referred to as pied. If something's pied, it's been purposely misinforming. And there are times that within the folk practitioner community, that is very much alive and well, where we're like, all right, I'm just going to tell you something so you leave me alone. Because for whatever reason, we realize that this is not the person to give actual magical knowledge to.
Absolutely.
And so instead of saying no, we just tell you some insane thing. You got to go get you a brick from a church that burnt down on a rainy night. I will send you off for magical ingredients and I won't see you for years. And I know that. And it's a way of protecting the magic, protecting the sanctity of the magic. People come in looking to get power over.
Absolutely.
I need a magic spell so I can do this, this, and this. And like you said, me.
Yeah.
And the reality of folk magic is that it's about community.
Absolutely, it is.
And when you get that me person in front of you, then you'll be like telling them all sorts of stuff. That's just part of it. And in regards to the Middleton journals, yeah, it's full of all of that. It's full of misinformation, lies, and truth. And in time, you see the difference.
You build a relationship with them.
Yes, and there's also ways that, you know, if I read something or somebody tells me I've never heard it before, I'm like, okay, let's back this up a little bit. Let me go find out a little bit more and see if I can't in some way collaborate, or if I can't in some way verify where this is going. All right. You know, and with the workings that I used out of the Middleton journals, I was very purposeful in making sure that I had secondary sources behind those entries, so that it wasn't just being pulled from the Middleton journals. And so that is something that personally I'm very much about, where I'm like, yeah, just because somebody said it once, don't make it real.
Yeah. Unless they take ownership of it and say, I created this. Absolutely. Yeah.
You got a name at the end.
Yeah.
Where you're saying this is, if there's a name, but so much is urban myths.
Yeah.
You know, and deciphering between the two is sometimes challenging. You know, I'm not you just don't know what you don't know.
It's true. You said that I apologize, I cut you off with that little joke before, but you were starting to say so much of what's in the Middleton journals is about dirt. Did that surprise you when you were starting to write your book and go into it and see how much? Did that surprise you?
Yes. When I stood in Bonaventure, I thought I was going to tell stories about all the graveyards that I went to. And you know, because I've been hunting graveyards for over 40 years now. I'm like, I've been at all sorts of graveyards. So I thought it was going to be a book about graveyards. And then I got into research, and then I got into telling stories and talking with folks and realizing, no, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the dirt.
Yes.
And once that like light bulb went off in my brain, it just, you know, I already had, you know, the dirt of my grandmother and the dirt of my mother's graves on my altar. And so it was sort of going home and looking at what I was already doing. You know, and a lot of times here in the South, when somebody's put in the ground, you will see people as that body and they're getting ready to cover up the casket, reach down and take a handful of dirt. Put it in a little, you know, white handkerchief, fold that. All right. And that is dirt of memory, remembrance. It's a way to stay connected to the dead. You take home that freshly tilled dirt is a way of staying connected to them. And again, I was at a funeral and I watched it and I realized we're doing this, but nobody's talking about it. It is so important within, you know, the flavor of folk magic that I'm involved in here, especially I'm in the Sea Islands, that Charleston to Savannah, the Gullah Geechee corridor. And so I think our influence for the importance of dirt comes from the Middle Passage.
Right, that makes sense. Absolutely.
Where we have, you know, I years ago, I had a Gullah woman tell me that part of they have a little handkerchief that has dirt that their relative brought from Africa on the Middle Passage. He held a handful of dirt on the Middle Passage and brought it over. And I don't know if it's true or not, but I know it's beautiful and I want it to be true. Okay. And for
it feels
her family,
natural, right?
Yes. And for her family, that was a very important thing. And that they had this little bit of dirt that they've held on to. At that point, it would have been like 6 generations. They're holding this dirt, this memory of you know, Africa for them. And that translated into the dirt here and how important it is. And then once you put people in the ground, that you become part of that dirt.
It's true, in a very literal sense. A very
Yes.
literal sense. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so we work with dirt, but we don't talk about it. And once I started seeing it, then I could start talking about it and writing about it and being like, yeah, this is what we're doing.
Yeah. It's a wonderful book. When I started to actually get into it, and I have to be honest, like the sheer numbers of guests that I have on and all of their I'm skimming a lot, but I'm one of those people. But it's fascinating which ones have come onto my desk, because in my own book I talk a great deal about land as ancestor in a very literal sense, right? That what we were talking about before, that 7 years that your body literally becomes part of it. But I feel like in many ways people, it's an abstract concept for them, but when you really think about it, it is that life cycle, right? We're eating the vegetation that's grown on this land. We go into that. We're composed of probably atoms that were originally part of our ancestors. When you're in a place for such a long time, when your biological ancestry is in such a place for a long time, and I feel like people become very abstract, but in the animistic sense, right? Both the womb and the tomb, right?
It is. When you hold a handful of dirt, you're holding the entirety of the universe.
Yeah.
Everything that was, everything that is, and everything that will be.
Yeah.
And once you feel that, you become connected to it.
I completely agree.
And the cycles of the seasons, they're all part of it. And I think for some folks, it's almost too simple. It's like go in your backyard and experience it. And they're like, but nobody wrote a book or gave me 10 steps on how.
Well, you have.
I hope I've inspired. I want Conjuring Dirt to inspire people to stand in their own backyards. I don't want you to come to my backyard, first of all. Yes. I mean, I am a typical Southerner. I will wave, smile, and talk all day. And at the end of the day, you need to go home.
Yes.
All right.
Get some corner cobs, go home.
You done visited long enough. You need to go home. I'm not, and I use so much of the stories of here in the Low Country, here in the South Carolina, Georgia, Sea Island area, because those are the stories I know. And I want to inspire people to go find your own stories, find your own dirts, you know, and how you're relating to it, and understanding that spirit of place it is right under your feet.
Literally right under your feet. Absolutely.
And I think right now our community, in a lot of ways, we have so many books coming out. You said it. I have a stack of books I have to read too. I'm like, oh, please don't give me another book to read. We're almost suffering from information overload.
It's true.
We have so many books, because I can remember, like, you were talking in the 80s, and I'm thinking, yeah, they used to put out like 2-3 books a year. All right. Well into the 90s, we didn't have the volume that I see. And what I see here in the past decade is publishing houses that put out 80 titles a year are now putting out 1,800 titles a year.
Yeah.
And how do we decipher, how do we have discernment on good information versus circular knowledge? Circular knowledge meaning that we each use each other as reference and we never bring in another outside source. And I see so many of our books are just circular knowledge, you know, and I'm hoping that we have more books like mine where there are people standing in their own dirt celebrating the magic that they're creating. And those are what the stories we need to hear at this point. You know, we don't need another goddess book. All right. That goddess ain't changed nothing for 4,000 years. She done 20 books on it. The 21st book ain't gonna have nothing different.
Yeah.
All right. She ain't said nothing. Ain't nothing
Mhm.
changed.
Yeah.
Where I'm just like, are you kidding? Another book on this, you know? And looking at how do you tell if it's a good book, you know?
Mhm.
And that back to discernment.
Yeah.
You know, where's their personal story from? Where's that bibliography from? Where are they
Mhm.
citing the sources? Are we
Mhm.
dealing with a personal gnosis, or are we dealing with an academic level dissertation? Because we need those academic level dissertations, and
Mhm.
we need personal gnosis.
We
But
need both, absolutely.
when they get mushed together and one is presented as the other, where your personal gnosis is now supposed to be an academic cited source, no.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's really,
Yeah.
I think I recommend, and I recommend Craig's book, because I think it's the best book I've read in the past couple of
Yeah.
years. His Witchcraft Unchained.
Yeah, it's good, isn't it?
Um,
I really enjoyed it.
Chapter 3 on the fluidity of divinity blew me away. He sat me back and let me think different. And when
Yeah.
somebody does that, I'm like, all right, this is the real deal.
Mm. Mhm.
And there's cited sources. It's beautiful. I recommend that for modern witchcraft. If you are identify as a modern witch in any sense and you want to know more about how modern witches came about, he laid it out there. As far as American folk magic,
Mhm.
Corey Hutchinson, New World Witchery is where I think the first time somebody actually wrote down the American folk magic in a way that we can all understand.
I just happen to have it at hand. That one right there.
I know we're talking about my book, and I'm going to tell you about everybody else's books. But Corey really took it. He is a college professor. He took
Yeah.
more of an academic side, but at the same time, he made it readable. And
And
that
he
was
had some wonderful. Sorry, go on.
it was the first time I read a book where I'm like, oh my gosh, somebody knows us.
Well, and that's that connection piece between sitting in both worlds. Corey sits in both worlds, although he's PhD academic, sits in the academic sphere, and he's had flack for that. I understand. He also is solidly in our world too. That's that bridging piece, right?
You can be a PhD and be a magical practitioner.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yes, he did take flack where they were like, who are you? But he really put down what some of these Southern folk blends are doing.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the first time I read in a book where, you know, that the Southern conjure, the hoodoo, how these came about, how they're synchronistic and at the same time different.
Yeah.
And we are having good information put out there. Another great thing about Corey's book that I always recommend to people is at the end of every chapter is a list of books you can read.
Absolutely. Yes.
That
Yeah, I
will
really
take you
appreciated that.
further down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And so if you're really wanting to know about the American folk magic practice, then that is a great place to go.
Mm-hmm.
And we're finally getting good books, but it seems like we're getting the good books in a sea of bad books, and you've got to dig
Yeah.
for
It's
them.
it's one of those things, and I'm hesitant to speak too much on this because obviously I have my own published book out there, but I feel like it's one of those, for me, it was a realization that publishers will be publishing for entertainment and for information. They're publishing the entertainment ones, not really expecting that they're gonna go, like they're not going to become classics. They're just there to fulfill a certain need for Christmas time or for, for birthday time or whatever, right? Just for this year, 2 years, and they're not expecting them to go forward. Fortunately, that's the issue, though. Certain things are not going to be perceptive, right?
Right now,
Yeah.
most of the publishers in our genre have realized we're a cash cow. We buy books.
Right.
And so their job is to put out as many books as they can. They don't care if it's good, bad, or indifferent.
Mm-hmm.
and just throw it against the wall and see which ones stick.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean,
Yeah.
when I finished conjuring dirt, I sat on it, the manuscript, for about 3 months before I decided. And then I actually sent it to Corey Hutchinson. All right, he wrote he wrote a glowing endorsement of the book, but I sent it to Corey first with, what do you think of this? And are people going to understand what I'm talking about? And I'm talking about dirt, you know, and is this even worthy?
And what did Corey say? Corey said, "This isn't a by the numbers sort of tour, though, as Taren enlivens informative sections on graveyard dirt or working at the crossroads with stories drawn from history, folklore, and her own life. As a practical guide, it's full of useful tidbits." And well, there was another piece in here that was just like beautiful. Like the very best guidebooks or local excursions, you're accompanied by someone who answers your questions before you even ask them. Now that is as glowing as anything anybody can say, right?
Yeah. Corey liked the part about when I was talking in Savannah that you can't swing a dead cat without it hitting on a tomb. And he said, when he read that, he's like, I knew you had been standing in Savannah, because only someone in Savannah would say that.
Oh, that's funny. That's so funny.
And it was just, yes, I was concerned that I was bringing, you know, forth the subject matter and how it was going to be taken. And were people going to understand what I was talking about?
And yet you had, like, I think Charles Porterfield, Professor Porterfield also, yes. Professor Porterfield also said, and Orion Foxwood. I mean, those are amazing people. Let's be honest here.
I've been friends with both of them for years.
Yeah.
Professor Porterfield, the utmost respect, the most amazing as far as our modern folk practitioners. And this is somebody who doesn't seek publicity. He's got a simple website. His website's from like the 80s, I think.
I think he actually updated it recently. I saw on Facebook, I think.
Did he really?
I think so. I don't know. Maybe that's just what it's got.
He's about being of service to his community. And he was another one that when I was writing Conjuring Dirt, I had reached out and talked with him about the Middleton journals. Because again, I was concerned with the ground I was walking on.
Absolutely.
Thinking, oh, this could go bad for me. And being able to talk with him about it and everything, and he offered some of the most amazing guidance to me, you know. And it was the same thing with Orion Foxwood, who is Appalachian conjurer, reaching out to him. I've known him for 30 plus years now, and telling him what I'm working on and having him give me that feedback.
Yeah.
It was very important, because so much of what I wrote about was the stories I heard.
Yeah.
This is how people are doing it. And this is how modern practitioners are doing it. I didn't want to create the antiquity of, I wanted very much a modern, you can go out and do it now.
And I think you've succeeded, honestly. Reading, like, dirt has been something, because I've always been adjacent to hoodoo, and dirt isn't necessarily something that was part of my own practice before that, which is bullshit, because it actually was, but I didn't see it that way, right?
Right. Well, that's what I mean. We were all doing it.
Yeah, it's true. We are. Yeah.
But no, it was so part of everyday norm. We never saw it.
No.
And when I had that glimpse and that reality of it's in the dirt, we are working dirt so hard.
Yeah, very much so.
And, you know, you in your book with the spirit of place, you're talking dirt.
It's true. Yeah. And then that intersection piece, right? Like, something I'm really particularly interested in lately is the relationship between kind of the official church and agriculture. And that idea of singing psalms into the dirt as you're plowing, or bringing some of the bread, or some of the consecrated host and sprinkling it into your fields to enliven it with prosperity. That's really fascinating to me. And again, back in the day, that was what you would do.
That was very normal. Yeah, the singing of the Psalms. And a lot of times, you know, people are like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
And it's really, I feel very blessed because my grandmother was a Southern Baptist prayer healer. So I was already exposed to Christian mysticism, Christian magic, Jesus magic, as a young child, and the Psalms, and that sent me down an entirely different road of learning about the Psalms and my own personal love of them. You know, we had talked a little bit about where I tell people like, the Psalms, that's Christian. And you're like, no, it's not. The Psalms existed 1800 years before the word Christian was spoken. You know, this is back into the original Abrahamic mysticism. This is part of that Abraham and Sarah turning their backs, they were turning their backs on the corruption of the temples, because in these temples had been placed these corrupt priests. And Abraham said, no, I can talk to God without that priest. And it's, yeah. But somehow modern Christianity says, no, we need to have that priest back. You know, there is corruption in the church that has to be acknowledged. But we have to go back to the beginnings and understand where Abraham was, what he was preaching to us. Those stories that we hold is that we each get our own relationship with divinity. And I don't have to define my relationship by what those people over there are doing. You know, and to take that and understand that. And the Psalms, we know we only have 150 of them. At one point we had thousands. We know that because of some of the references to them. You know, and we have King Solomon, who a lot of us know within Western occultism because of the Solomatic magic, the seals of Solomon, the naming of the demons, the ring that commanded the demons, you know, all of that. Well, hey guys, guess what? Some of the Psalms were written by Solomon.
Exactly right. Exactly. Yeah.
All right. We attribute, I think, at least 3 of the Psalms to King Solomon. All right. King David was his father. For many folks, King David is the founder of the Jewish faith. And at the same time, he is also the founder of the beginning of our occult, our Western occult philosophy. All right. And the Psalms were right in the middle of all of that the whole time. I think the greatest thing the Psalms did was put its magic in plain sight.
I agree. And let's be honest here, they were cousins of many of the other magical traditions in that region, all song-based. Song has been such a powerful form of magic everywhere. And in truth, I think that's why, particularly when you look at some of the regional folk traditions, the Psalms were taken, like in Wales, for example. My friend Mara Starling wrote the Welsh Witchcraft book, and she talks about how the Celtic poetic kind of style of magic really connected in with psalms and particularly songs in the church. And that's why Christian churches in Wales are so important centers of culture and also magic, because of the song. Like, the song lyrics may have changed, but the essence is still there, right?
The energy's still there. They're still singing it.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's so powerful.
You know,
and that's where taking the time, I guess, to learn a little bit more, being mindful of circular sources. Because sometimes I think in the neo-pagan community, it does get a little anti-Christian. And that's not what it's about.
I agree completely.
We draw so much of our magic and our mysticism from that time period.
And it's syncretic, right? It's integrative. It doesn't need to be with such hard lines in between.
No, I put my Bible on the same altar I put my goddess statue.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I am just fine with that. You know,
Love it. I love it.
you
I love
know,
it.
where I they're all of it.
Mm.
I don't see a separation of it, you know,
Yeah.
where I bet, you know, you can't put this goddess on the altar with this god, or these two goddesses don't get along. And I'm like, who says so?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I want to see who says so, because I know that if I read, you know, the sonnets of Inanna,
Mm-hmm.
she's welcoming. She's got no
Exactly.
problem having everybody come around. I know if I get into the true lore of Hecate and we have those older stories of Greco-Roman, that this is a welcoming goddess. Why are you putting conditions on them? You
I
know, where
agree.
you can't mix pantheons. And I'm like, I don't want to hear any of that.
On that note, though, I'm seeing the time. I apologize. I actually have a client in 10 minutes, so I need to
Oh,
bring this to an end,
yeah,
but it's all good. No, I've been really enjoying this. I could probably go for hours and hours and hours, Taren. I'm going to have you back, because when your next project, whatever that happens to be, in another 3 years, maybe, or maybe less than that, we're going to
I
have you
don't
back.
know. I gotta
Ah.
wait for the stories to come. I have had folks ask me, because I did leave quite a bit on the cutting room floor, so to speak, and going back and putting that back into a conjuring dirt too, because there were some things that it just didn't all fit. And so, yes, I'm hoping maybe we'll see. But for me, it's just about living my life and getting out there. And even if I'm not doing anything interesting, I'll still come and chat with you.
I would love that. I would love that. This has been delightful. And I always get a little nervous when meeting somebody for the first time. Now I've met so many of our colleagues, it's like fine, but I always get a little nervous. But this was wonderful. I really, really appreciated this. And again, like, for those who are listening to this podcast because of my own book, I see a lot of connection points. And I think for the majority of my audience, I think that they'll really get something out of this. And so I congratulate you. It's a beautiful book. It really is. It's right there.
Conjuring Dirt, Magic of Footprints, Crossroads and Graveyards by Moon Book Publishing.
And that is available now. People can go and pick that up now, as well as your other book. And again, for people who are watching this, if you look just below Taren's name there, you can go and find out more about her at her website there, and also order books through there too. Contact you, and you're on social media too. So this has been delightful. Thank you again for coming on.
Thank you so much. I've so enjoyed it. And I do have to, like you, I sort of wonder who I'm going to sit with.
It's fascinating, isn't it? But it's that networking piece, right? It's always interesting to connect with people, and particularly a lot of Southerners. As I said, there's a lot of I've had quite a few guests from down that way throughout the South, and it's so interesting to me how similar the stories are. Different maybe endings, different characters, but similar stories to where I'm from, or where some of my other listeners are from. That's that universality, right?
It is so true. The more I find out about like the British folk magic, the more I'm like, oh, that makes sense.
I'm familiar.
Yeah,
I've
I
been Ben Stimson. Oh, I'm going to sign off, but thank you so much again. I've been Ben Stimson. This has been Taren. Go and find her website down below. And everybody else, have a good rest of your week.